Yeah, Western China. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty have declared that to be the largest area of surveillance, social control. This is China controlling the Muslim population just at the border of Kazakhstan. And the New York Times characterized it as the place where artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and all the technology is being put to the finest tuned, large-scale application. I'm wondering whether you've had a chance to take a look at that. I know you said you were interested in the China link. That's the first part of my question. And the other is, we're transferring enormous amounts of technology to Israel. Israel's transferring it to China. Is there some kind of place in there that could create a crack in U.S. policy in terms of arming Israel?
No, that's an important question, because that's what is really upsetting the United States, is that Israel has privileged access to American military technology. There's been numerous congressional bills and programs that allow that. Israel has access that Europeans don't have to American military technology. And Israel, I think, is seen as an extension of the military-industrial complex. It's the laboratory, and for example, the Israeli Air Force got the new F-35 stealth bombers before the American Air Force got it, because it was much better if Israeli pilots test it out, and if they crash or things don't work, rather than American pilots. I mean, that's part of it. But Israel provides a laboratory in the Middle East much better than some field in Texas, you see. So Israel has privileged access to American technology, and what's true is that Israel is then transferring that technology to other countries, including China. There's a huge argument now between Israel and the United States over technology transfer to China. Israel just had to cancel a big contract with Croatia for old Israeli planes because they contained American technologies. Do you know? I'll show you how serious it got during the Bush the Son administration, where you had these Jewish neocons. Paul Wolfowitz was the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Douglas Faith was a special undersecretary and so on. Faith, who's a Jewish neocon in the Bush administration, threatened that the United States would cut diplomatic ties with Israel if Israel did not stop transferring American military technology to China. It got to that point where a Jewish neocon was threatening Israel. And in fact, they forced Israel to fire Amos Yaron, who was the Director General of the Ministry of Defense in Israel. And until today, he's not allowed to set foot in the United States. This is, 20 years later. So, it's noticed by the United States. I mean, I think Israel has protection of Congress, but the Pentagon is very, very split. Some in the Pentagon are in favor of Israel and like to work with Israel because of its technological sophistication, but others are really afraid of Israel and are very resentful of the fact that Israel gets... Now, there's there's all kinds of things, but for example, other countries that get American military aid have to spend that money in the United States. So it's really a subsidy to the American defense industry. But Israel only has to spend 70% of the money it gets, and it gets about $4 billion a year in the United States. The other 30% it's allowed to use for the development of its own military industry. So the fact that you have privileged access to cutting-edge American technology and a few $1 billion a year to develop it, plus your own resources, and in a way, you become a competitor of the United States in many places, shows this problematic relationship. One reason why countries prefer Israeli drones to American drones for example, is the United States sells drones, but it won't sell the black box. You know, the drones contain technologies that it doesn't want other countries to have, and information. So you can buy an American drone, but you don't buy all the technology and information that's in it. Israel will sell you the whole thing. You see, so it's much better to buy an Israeli drone than it is an American drone, just as one example. So, you know, there's all kind. I write about this in detail in my book. And of course, again, Israel, China, I'm writing an article about that now because this is like the polar ends. The two countries that have no constraints whatsoever on the use of these technologies. You know, China with its huge Uyghur, but also this social credit system on its own people, and then Israel with the Palestinians. So, you know, what you're seeing in China and Israel is, in a sense, the forerunner of what you're liable to see, you know, in the future in this country.
When I look at that map, I see, I think, less relationship to Western Europe, and we were told, I think, that in
one arrow with all these. All these are.
Does Israel have much in the way of sales to Western European democracies?
Yes, Europe is the largest, one of the largest customers of Israeli military surveillance, more than the United States even.
Is it not military or more like civilian?
Both. You can't break them down, really.
I used to hear that in Europe, the government is afraid of the people, whereas in the United States, the people are afraid of the government. So I was thinking maybe Israel does not have as much sales to Western European in the area of surveillance technology. Do you have any specific as to that data?
Yeah, I do. I mean, first of all, you know, Europe is developing the Watchkeeper drone. That's going to be the European drone, which is owned 51% by Elbit Systems. So it's an Israeli drone that's being Europeanized. And I try to go here a little bit. I couldn't put everything on the map, but I sort of go country by country and talk about, Germany is selling Israel 9 nuclear-capable submarines. You know, Britain has 2 nuclear submarines. Or 1 even, 1 or 2. China, I think, has 2. Israel's going to have 9 nuclear submarines from Germany, with all the technologies that implies. So you have that. But Israel is trying, your point is really interesting. Again, Europe is trying to push back against the security state idea. But I'll give you just a cute example of how it's working. You had the bombing in Brussels a couple years ago. Remember the airport in Brussels? And you can look this up. I'm not making this up. The Israeli government response to Belgium wasn't, "We're sorry." It was, "Stop eating chocolate, you Belgians, and join the world." And what Israel said to Belgium was, "You criticize us because of our occupation. You should be imitating us. You know, you've got a few Muslims in some neighborhood in Brussels, and that's upsetting." Or Paris, they said the same thing to Paris. You've got these Muslims in some of your suburbs that are upsetting your country. Look what we've done in Israel. We have a country that's a vibrant democracy for our people, economically flourishing. Everybody has personal security in a country where half the population are terrorists. Imagine if we can do that in Israel, what we could do for you in Belgium. So the Belgians pushed back because it's true. They really are sensitive to their social democracies. But it gets weaker and weaker, especially as you have a populist movement arising in Europe, and you've got this anti-immigrant sentiment and so on. So what I'm saying is, in some ways, the most dangerous export of Israel is this concept of the security state that I think is developing with China. I haven't gotten the hard data yet, that then it's trying to export to Europe, to the United States. The global south is much easier because the global south is already tuned into that kind of relationship. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about NDAs, the role of NDAs in secrecy, like corporate secrecy, because a couple of months ago in September, The Intercept published an article that IBM had been developing, doing a lot of its machine learning, training a lot of video surveillance cameras to interact with artificial intelligence to do facial recognition with like racial profiling options. And then The Intercept, it's not that the article ended it, it had ended up for its own reasons, but The Intercept discovered this and publicized it. But one of the main reasons it didn't become public was that the New York Police Department and IBM signed what's called a non-disclosure agreement, which is a corporate agreement. Any computer scientist signs it when you get a job. It's just an absolutely standard part of any computer scientist's life is that you sign this. And I wondered how that had affected your work and your research and in general, the ability to understand this stuff.
First of all, you should know the New York police force has an office in Tel Aviv. I mean, they have an actual office presence. You have a New York police office in Israel. Yeah, this is all. I mean, a lot of this is true, is secret, and I'm not privy to everything. But a surprising amount of this information is public, again, all these technologies are being developed, some of which are still illegal. But Israel is trying very much to change the rules. It has a campaign called Lawfare, run partly by B'nai B'rith. And Lawfare says terrorists are using human rights against us, against democracies, because they don't follow human rights, and we have to. Human rights conventions, international law. So in a way, we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. So lawfare means let's get rid of all those constraints on our militaries. Basically, what Israel's trying to do is to remove constraints on war against the people. There are two fundamental principles in the wars of engagement. Anyway, one of the principles is you can't kill or harm non-combatants, civilian populations. The principle of distinction, it's called, which means that, in war you can't attack civilians. Well, Israel is saying, hey, terrorists don't dress in uniforms. A 3-year-old girl could be carrying a bomb. Let's eliminate this combat, non-combatant distinction, which would be pretty dangerous, giving the states the right to attack anybody that they decide is a terrorist. The second principle is called the principle of proportionality, and that is that you're not allowed to attack a population disproportional to the threat. So what Israel is doing in Gaza is completely illegal according to the principle of proportionality. So the lawfare campaign is trying to eliminate these two fundamental principles in international law, and in that way strengthen the state's hand. And once the state's hand, and that goes back to this whole pacification circle, then these technologies that are in the drawer that are today illegal, once you have more authority as a security state, then you can begin to use these technologies that you can't use today. So, for example, one more, in the United States, you're not supposed to be racial profiling in airports. Racial profiling, ethnic profiling is illegal. I'm sure, it's not, anyway, it is. It's not in Israel. In Israel, on the contrary, Israel says you're stupid. You know who the terrorists are. We have algorithms. We have profiles. We know who the terrorists are. Why are you spending your time with the 80-year-old person in the wheelchair and the 6-year-old kid that's got to stand there and put his hands over his head, and everybody has to do the same thing, when you know that 98% of the people aren't the problem. You know who the problematic people are. So why don't you profile them like we do? And you save time, you save energy, and it's more efficient. No one, it's been 30 years now, 40 years since there's been an attack in the Tel Aviv airport. So you see, that's, again, that kind of erosion, because it makes sense to people. We want security. We want our government to bring security. So security is a very dangerous term because it's non-problematic. I want security, of course, and I want my government to bring it to me. So whatever the government decides to do, I accept. Now, what I'm saying in my book, I'm trying to get us to use the word pacification because pacification brings up issues. So you say, I want security. Okay, fine. Do you want to be pacified? What if we substitute the word pacification for security? Do you want to be pacified? That brings up the question then that security doesn't bring up. Who wants to pacify me? How are they pacifying me? Why are they pacifying me? And all of a sudden these techniques in the airport begin to take on a much more critical political aspect than they do if you simply say security. So, that's why I'm saying even the language is being used covers a political reality that we have to be aware of. Here in the back, and then I'll come back to you.
Are all of these things which you are revealing to us tonight connected with the long-time international Zionist conspiracy for worldwide domination?
No, and I'm very careful, even in my book, to say I don't want to be conspiratorial. I'm very against any kind of conspiracy thinking because it's simplistic, and if everything falls neatly, it's not true. I mean, I'm not blaming, and I said in my talk somewhere, that I'm not, Israel's not the only actor. But at the same time, if you can show, now people can reject that idea, but if you can show that in this particular economic and political constellation, Israel does play a particular role because it has certain technologies and it has a certain experience, you can make the case that I'm making without being conspiratorial. I'm not trying to say Jews control the world. And the point's well taken because, that's the enemy of critical thinking. And left thinking is conspiracy thinking. And it's something we really have to fight all the time.
I was wondering what your sense of the connection of the corporate world is to what you're talking about. Because in fact, corporations now are increasingly international in their sphere, and you kind of put them in there in the beginning, but then I haven't heard anything about corporations. What is your sense of their role?
Well, corporations work through governments. Corporations want to make money. So they don't want to spend the billions of dollars you need to spend to develop technologies. They let governments and our taxpayer dollars do that. So in other words, the Pentagon, there's a department of the Pentagon called DARPA. Some of you might be aware of DARPA. DARPA, which is the Department of Advanced Research Projects. I can't remember exactly, but look it up on the internet. DARPA's role, its mission in the Pentagon, it's got like a $4 or $5 billion a year budget, which is very small in the $1 trillion budget of the Pentagon. Its mission is to make science fiction real. That's its mission. And it's developing things, for example, there are cloaks that can make you invisible. In other words, what it's trying to do, one of the programs it has, is to make all the technology you saw in Harry Potter movies real within the next few years, especially for military uses. But then, of course, there's all the... So using nanotechnologies, the way nano mirrors and so on can reflect light, you can create a cloak that makes you invisible or a cloak that makes a tank invisible. or a plane invisible. There's nano paint now. The stealth bomber, the F-35 stealth bomber, uses a certain nano paint that deflects light in a certain way and makes it close to invisible. So these technologies all exist, or could exist, and so on. So I think, but you know, it costs a lot of money to develop these things. So a corporation doesn't want to spend $4 billion of its own money in terms of developing some nanomaterials is one of the huge new cutting edge, you know, create materials that soldiers can wear that are paper thin, but that protect them against bullets, against gases, and if a soldier gets wounded, contain materials that make the wound, you know, what's it called? Repair the wound, or something like that. All kinds of materials, like smart materials, they're called. There's a whole, at MIT, there's a whole institute. It's called the Institute of Soldier Nanotechnology. Look it up. I mean, all these things are there. My point is that these are all funded by governments because, you know, why should industry invest that money when, you know, so governments bring the technology up to the point where then industry can begin to apply it and use it and so on. So I would say that in many ways corporations are determining the agendas of governments. Certainly this idea of global capitalism and repression and all of that, that's coming from corporations. Resource wars, the demand, you know, Halliburton is the best example for Iraq, for, you know, as an example of that. And then governments, you know, do the bidding, basically. I mean, we know the lobbyist system in Congress. Corporations run governments, but governments fund the technologies for the corporations and get them to a point where then it's affordable to develop them.
Left-leaning people have been talking about corporate feudalism for several decades. What you're describing essentially is basically just a continuation of that. Isn't that right? Well, you're saying it's nothing new. You're just saying that the technology has become so much more sophisticated that the corporate feudalism is becoming an increasing reality.
Yeah, I would say two things. The technology is becoming so powerful and so totalizing that it gives armies, military, police forces a power they never had. And second of all, with neoliberalism, you know, neoliberalism is unregulated capitalism. And that was the difference. I mean, Nixon was a Republican capitalist, right? Nixon started the EPA. You know, Nixon was in favor of regulation of capitalism, just even though we saw him as his right-wing. I mean, today he'd be a liberal Democrat, Nixon, I think. You know, so this unregulated capitalism has created a whole new dynamic in which there's no more monopoly busting. Corporations have a free rein to do anything. Trump is very proud of the fact, you know, remember he sat with piles of regulations that he eliminated. And so corporations are unfettered and have access to technologies that are much, much more powerful than anything that existed. So you're right, it's an extension of the system, but in a way that you know, has an impact that has never been felt before. Maybe one last question, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I just want to say that I've always had the idea that what we needed in the United States was a huge, and Chomsky has called for this too, a huge campaign to stop all U.S. aid to Israel. Right. And it almost seems like, from what you're putting up here, would that make a difference?
No, I think it would make a big difference. A campaign against not only selling weapons to Israel, but selling technologies to Israel, and vice versa. You know, the U.S. campaign has a little bit of a program like that, you know, of at least trying, you know, they're publicizing how much money goes to Israel and trying to say, stop the $34 billion to Israel. But they haven't gone into real detail. And I think there's two levels here. One is by focusing on some of these things and the American involvement, you're able to see how the occupation works, what Israel is doing, but also, again, how it rebounds to the United States. In all my talks, I'm trying to say to people, you know, it's very nice, and it's important, that we have solidarity with the Palestinians for their human rights and their suffering and all that stuff. But it's not a faraway conflict affecting somebody over there. As your homeland security and police become Israelized, and you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg here, as they become Israelized, you are becoming Palestinianized. You're becoming Palestinians. Because if Israel's attacking Gaza, it's not attacking the Palestinians. They don't matter. They're the guinea pigs. What Israel is doing is using them, but it's really, the idea is just to outfit your police forces. So you become the end users, the recipients of these technologies. So in a way, it's kind of a reflective BDS, because it's a BDS that focuses on Israel and exposes these powerful things, including that Israel's a powerful country and not a victim, which is also an important message. But it also reflects back in terms of American technologies or technologies being brought into America. I mean, this whole campaign of JVP, Deadly Exchange, you know, is in a sense a very good kind of a program, because it's highlighting, you know, how Israel's working with the American police. So I think, yes, I think BDS should really begin to go into those areas more, because that's what brings it home. The message being the occupation is here. You know, your companies are complicit, your police forces are complicit, your universities are complicit, and it's endangering your civil liberties. I mean, this isn't only endangering Palestinians, it's coming back to endangering all of us. And I think that's the message that we should try to develop more. So thank you much. Now go have a good night's sleep.